We started one-on-ones to give our fan community a direct line to the PLL. And right now, we're building a new way for fans to connect directly with each other. PLL Chat lets fans share, react, and message all within the PLL app. Learn more at premierlacrosseleague.com/PLL-chat.
What's up, everyone? Welcome, episode 3 of One-on-Ones with Mike and Paul. Mike's wearing the Beans hat. Where can you get that?
I think you can get it on the shop, PLLmerch.com. But, you know, I love the Beans merch.
We had our Beans holiday April 1st.
Well, it's special to us. In 2020, we had nothing going on, and the Beans joke was the first time we did that joke.
Yeah.
And we also were able to bring in a sponsor and then have Beans be part of this larger initiative to create content without games being played and in the world being sort of on pause. And so it has a sentimental value to me.
I remember it working better than we all anticipated. Well, first of all, we built a website for them. We built a brand identity. We did a state of the league. Yeah. Brett and I shot at my place in LA with masks on. And I think one of the reasons why it worked is it was on the heels of us expanding to our 7th team. Yeah. And a lot of people going like 6 to 7. Their touring model is based on even numbers. Surely they're going to add an 8th. And so I would have bought it too. It lasted about a week. Anyway, this is their birthday celebration, April Fool's. So we've tried some April Fool's jokes that have fallen flat on their face. Fine. That happens to everyone. But I like April Fool's as the Beans birthday.
Well, who knows? I mean, there may be a PLL Beans team one day.
Yeah.
Seriously, it's like a real brand. There's a cult following. There's, you know, there are people who show up to PLL events who only rock PLL beans, right? And so maybe it's an expansion team if we ever sell teams.
I mean, we've had crazier.
I mean,
there was the Atlanta Blaze.
Yeah.
I remember when Atlanta had a team in MLL and they did a big build up and all of us as players were talking when they went with Blaze and we went, I mean, obviously there's Blaze Reardon in the league, but when you think of Blaze, you think about smoking weed. And I remember thinking like, wow, that's the association.
It's kind of tight.
It's
kind of a tight name.
Like that our sport that's already struggling right now reputationally back in, 2015 or whatever it is. And they went with Blaze. Anyway, I kind of like Blaze, but when I think about Blaze, I think about Blaze Reardon. But anyway, there was a lot of back and forth. Beans could work at some point.
There's already an embedded fan base. You get off the blocks fast if you're an expansion team. I don't know.
What are some funky names? I know we've been uploading these podcasts to YouTube. So for the YouTube audience that's watching, comment below a name choice. We went through that charades with PMT, and they chose Water Dogs with each of you guys. And now Water Dogs is one of the best teams in the league. Okay, we're going to start with some lacrosse news, a little bit of sports business, 3 of your questions that Brett selected at the top. Notre Dame UVA, a couple of things I wanted to talk about as this game unfolded. UVA had just played Duke. Since the beginning, it's been a conversation around those 3 horses. Shout out Hopkins being the 4th now coming in and actually a top 3 team according to the People's Top 20 at TLN. But Notre Dame, Virginia, Duke, they've all sort of traded blows. Duke beat UVA 18-12 2 weeks ago. And we were all anticipating this Notre Dame UVA matchup because they play musical chairs. Also, Notre Dame and UVA have had some great crowds all season long, which is awesome to see. Notre Dame ends up beating UVA. Pat Cavanaugh, who will most certainly be a first-round draft pick, likely a top 3, set the all-time scoring record at Notre Dame, which is no small feat. Got covered by Pat McAfee. Were you able to watch any college lacrosse this weekend?
I watched some of the highlights. Look, like I said before, I try on the weekends. I try to like really focus on what I need to get done with the PLL, focus on the wife and son.
Yeah.
But for me, I watched a lot of the highlights. What stood out to me is the athleticism, the craftiness, the Cavanaugh brothers play with. Obviously, the crowds at the Duke Carolina game really stood out to me.
Yeah.
I think lacrosse is really on an upswing. But the collegiate level, the pro level, obviously I'm biased, but I just really see this formation and the brand really sort of coming back in a more mainstream way.
Yeah.
It's becoming less cultish. And so when I watch those highlights, I see that. Other thing that was going through my head is like, the Cavanaughs and what Matt Cavanaugh's done in the championship series of the Cannons now. I mean, they're a staple family in lacrosse.
Yeah.
I just want to sit down with Mr. Cavanaugh as a father of a son and be like, what did you do?
Yeah.
Like, seriously, they're not the biggest, they're not the tallest, but man, they are tough and they're scrappy.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what I think is so interesting about them is that everyone can kind of relate with that.
Those guys love the Rangers too, who've had a great start to their NHL playoffs. And they play like those grinders who like to get their nose dirty in the corner on the up check in hockey. And I've, knowing, fortunately, all three of them, they lead with toughness. And then the Kirst family, there's just more families, to your point. Yeah. It was really like, sort of the Powells, the Gates. But what we're seeing now, and I guess it's a good point, maybe if you have enough brothers or sisters playing lacrosse and you are lucky enough to occupy different positions, you've got your own team practice in the backyard.
Yeah.
I know the Kirst brothers, at least, you have midfielder, attackman, 2 attackmen, and a goalie.
Yeah. Well, I knew I needed to stop playing lacrosse, and you dusted me in the backyard. I literally almost fell over myself.
But we had the offense-defense vibe.
A straight check. Yeah, I was playing long pole. I was trying to guard you. You took like a 10-yard dash to me. I literally almost fell over. It was just a face dodge. And I was like, all right, I got to focus on football.
Yeah. Well, key is for some of you guys, by the way, who sent questions in around skill stuff, we're going to add that to ensuing podcasts. But the note that I hear there is don't give your offensive player 10 yards to run at you. Huge deficit. I mean, if you think about cornerbacks who give space, they're giving up the slant. And so if you're giving a lot of space to your dodging midfielder, to me, that was always when I was licking my chops. Couple of other things. Duke lost to UNC, which was a huge surprise and a big wrinkle heading into the ACC tournament. It gave UNC life to make the NCAAs. It put another seed of doubt in Duke. And it sends this ripple effect, much like we're seeing in the Big Ten, where like Hopkins won the Big Ten regular season, went undefeated. But the two teams they're likely going to face in the Big Ten tournament, they beat in overtime. And so they have Michigan on Thursday. But to your point, the feeling of lacrosse being back, we have ACC, Big Ten, Ivy tournament, Patriot tournament, all this week, and selections show on Sunday, where we're going to see the final bracket of 16. Are you going to make it out to the Final Four? You haven't been to a Final Four in a while.
I haven't been to a Final Four in a while. I gear up for training camp around there, PLL training camp, try to be focused, try to make sure we have everything running smoothly for the players. But I know we have a consortium of people going to it. I mean, look, for me, where I sit, I'm not the most technical when it comes to college lacrosse. I enjoy it as like just a casual sports fan, and I know how much it means to the league to have these stars emerging.
Yeah.
And for me, what I like is that there's a bunch of stars bubbling up. There's a ton of parity.
Yeah.
And a ton of parity means a lot of hype for the selection Sunday. And then also means that there's a lot of hype around the tournaments that are coming up, right? So, and then a lot of hype that folds into the PLL draft on May 7th. So
Totally.
For me, that's what I'm really excited about. And then obviously there's just a lot of great stars. There's a lot of great storylines. It's just good for the sport.
Yeah. 2 sleepers for our draft coming up. Be hard. It's actually hard to call them sleepers because I think they'd be number one in any other draft. Is Leon Entenmann out of Notre Dame, their goaltender, and what we've seen in the PLL with Blaze being the latest example of an MVP, and then also an anchor, because I think lacrosse is more like hockey in the playoffs where you have a goalie that's standing on their head. They're going to lead the team to victory. So Liam, expect for him to be a top pick, and then Jake Pizzino out of Albany, Native American, long pole.
Beast.
I was talking to Zed a couple of days ago about his time playing long pole at the World Championships in San Diego last year. He really loved it. And frankly, the sport's lucky that he didn't get a long pole sooner. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to see him play offensively the way that he does. So May 7th, the college draft, 7 o'clock ESPNU. This Sunday preceding the draft is Selection Show Sunday. Quint, Paul, Cotter on the call. We'll see some of them 2 days later. You wanted to talk about some sports business.
Sports business. All right, 2 topics I want to talk about. First, shout out to Kendall Baker, friend of the PLL. I read his newsletter every morning. I saw in his newsletter that on this day 103 years ago was crowned the first ever NFL champion.
Yeah.
The Akron Pros in 1921. Why that's interesting, right? You and I study the NFL a lot.
Yeah.
The NFL's, if you ever try to compare yourself, let me just say, to the NFL, you have no shot. But because they're just an anomaly.
We like to
And
say,
they're-
like, consider if you're comparing, you're never going to be the NFL.
NBA too, right? But like for us, we try to study what they've done.
Totally.
Right? They're 104 years old. And then the history too is a lot of what we think about. Like lacrosse has deeper history just in North America.
Yeah.
As you know, in the 1970s, Walter Camp created this game that he modeled off rugby and soccer. It was mostly played at Ivy League institutions. The early
In 1870.
Sorry, 1870.
Yeah.
Sorry. My math is all messed up. So 1870, they created this game. They played it all the way through the early 1900s. Teddy Roosevelt at Harvard saw this game being played, fell in love with it. Then when he was elected president in 1901, 1902, he was like, there's too many people dying from this sport, this football.
My God. Yeah.
And so he's like, I have to literally get people together. It was only played at the collegiate level, right? To change the rules. And so one of the big rule changes was passing the ball forward, not to the side. That created less pressure as rugby, you only can throw it to the side and you can kick it forward. So that was a big rule change that made the game safer, grew more participation. And then in the 1920s, they were like, wow, this is becoming massive at the collegiate level. Let's form the NFL. Let's put together a pro league on the back of the success of football at the collegiate level.
Yeah.
And let's see if we can grow this, right? And so for me, when I saw that stat from Kendall's, it just spurred that and how deep you and I have gone into the history of the NFL and how we really try to study people like Pete Rozelle and how he grabbed all the rights from the teams in the 60s, packaged them in to one national platform to sell them from the league level. And he was like, I'm willing to make the bet that giving up ticket sales is worth the national exposure. It ended up not affecting ticket sales. It ended up growing ticket sales. And that's what the MLB was scared of, right? So there's all these lessons you and I try to learn and apply to what we're doing.
Yeah. I mean, you nailed it. So one of my favorite podcasts that you turned me on to is Acquired. They have this 3.5 hour slog on the NFL. Few shout outs. Pete Rozelle was a 33-year-old commissioner coming out of the marketing department in Los Angeles. And just had a vision. The other thing was the NFL is the sport of television. They surpassed baseball in the 60s on the rise of TV because of your call out that they said, hey, let's actually package our games and go to a national broadcaster in a monolithic era of consumption. And they were getting 50 million people to watch. Like, do you know 84 million people watched the finale of Cheers, which was the lead-in to Seinfeld?
Insane.
So you wonder like how this happens in television. It's utilizing the modern medium of choice. We talk about being the league of social. That's the modern medium of choice. We're starting to see spill over into streaming. So the NFL figured out television, and Major League Baseball was afraid of television because your thought that they would impact ticket sales. And for those lacrosse fans out there that think the dip in attendance over the last 10 years at the College Final Four and other venues that have actually changed from how we led the start of this show is because of more exposure on broadcast. Bullshit. That's not, I mean, tell that to Burke Magnus. He said, no way. You're telling me like fewer people go to NBA games because the games are on television all the time? That's not the case.
No, it helps.
It helps.
Yeah.
So that's sort of adding to the NFL. And then the other shout out is 1920, or the date that you referenced at the start, the commissioner of pro football out of the gates, Jim Thorpe.
Yep.
Native American, played lacrosse, one of the all-time greatest Olympians. So understanding our past helps us build our future. But the NFL and then the NFL-AFL merger, all these types of things that we considered even when we ended up buying MLO.
Totally. I mean, it's important. We have to be students of the past to figure out ways to apply it to the future. So one more sports business topic before we get into questions. Woke up this morning, saw a headline across all news mediums, that this is the first time since 2005 that neither Steph, LeBron, or KD will be in the second round of the playoffs.
Wow.
What were you doing in 2005? You're at Hopkins?
Yeah, I was a freshman at Johns Hopkins getting ready.
So the first time since neither of those three guys will be in it.
Wow.
And for what sat with me was like a couple things. One, this is pro sports, and like you turn the page and it's really cutthroat and it's hard on a human level, but like that's just what happens in sports. The other thing that sat with me is the NBA sitting there being like, okay, what's our next crop of superstars?
Yeah.
Right. And by the way, like I'm no one to say that those three, you turn the page on those three guys, they could come back and whatever. But like, I think a lot of people are having that conversation of who's up next.
Yeah.
That's just pro sports, which is really hard on the human side. But for me, you and I always talk about stars, right? The NBA is so fortunate since 2005 to have these three guys as stars and carrying the torch of the NBA. And particularly LeBron
and it took
KD,
them several years to find them, because when Jordan turned over, you were going, oh,
yeah, when Jordan turned over,
we lost Michael.
But for me, what stood out to me, if you think about all three of those guys, they did two things really well that I think what makes a star. A league can't make a star, a team can't make a star. Star makes a star. What we can do is we can just help get behind them and help build their platform, and really talk about them in a way that really proclaims the work they're doing. But the work is, they have to have success. At least my recipe for what I think a star is, they have to have success on the floor, on the field, and then they also have to put in the work off the field. But that's just not just training. That's like the work and using the tools at their disposal to build their audience. So whether it's social, whether it's speaking events, whether it's work in the community, like there's an air of charisma that you have to have off the field.
Yeah.
That builds this stardom that attracts people.
Yeah.
And so yes, you want to be. You put everything you have into the field and or onto the court, and you want to win championships. And that's the ultimate goal. But like to really emerge as a star, I think the off the field component is just as important.
Yep. Oh, I'll reference my buddy who's now running sports at Instagram, who was at the agency that I was with back in that 2005 era, and Will Yoder. And Will used to tell me, there's all this excitement around Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and YouTube at the time. He was like, please continue to be the best on the field.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, the audience has X-ray vision. And you can only go so far as a creator if you're not performing. Right. If you also look at the history, Tiger Woods dominated the field. So did Lewis Hamilton. So did Michael Jordan. So did Steph Curry, LeBron, and KD.
Yeah.
So has Caitlin Clark. She's so far ahead of everyone else. She's averaging like 35 points a game in college is nuts. So you have to not only be the best, but I think if you're miles ahead as the best, it does you a big favor. And to your point, off the field, there has to be an element of pixie dust.
Yeah.
I think the league can support it. Streamers can support it with doc series and other like originals that are formed. I think some of the pixie dust around Caitlin actually goes 2 years back when Angel Reese did this after they beat Caitlin in the championship. And that was like a big point of drama. And that begins to percolate even unconsciously, then semi-consciously. Here's her retribution tour. The universe has it perfectly. They meet in the Final Four and boom, she beats Angel Reese and co. So there's these things that you can't manufacture as a league that makes sports so amazing.
Yeah.
And we try to figure that out every day with our media and content team around the PLL. One of them is something that we've discussed in Bill Tierney, who is by championships won the greatest ever. And he's coming in now and taking over Water Dogs organization from Andy Copeland. This Water Dogs organization is a team that lost to now the Utah Archers in the championship game last year, whose head coach is Chris Bates, who, by the way, when Bill Tierney left Princeton to go over to Denver, who took over? Chris Bates. So there are these stories, this pixie dust that incumbent on us and then our players to take advantage of.
Yeah. It almost seems like the recipe to building a star is like win on the field or on the court or on the ice. And then once you've had that credibility, then you can really start investing more heavily off the field. Would you say that's
100%.
a way to look at it? People are always asking questions around how do I become this on this show? So maybe a little advice.
Yeah, I mean, we often recommend authenticity. And when I say we, it's us as a media and content team. It's what Meta and YouTube recommend. It's what every network recommends. Now, a lot of athletes that I've seen across disciplines have come up and they see what I did on YouTube or what, LeBron James does with Uninterrupted. And they go, that's the model. I need to replicate that tone, that forum. And the truth is like, if it's not you, then you shouldn't do it. And I'll give you the example of Steph Curry. So Steph out of Davidson was a shy guy. He's introverted and didn't like the camera or the attention or the commercials. And we shared an agency in Octagon. So I had sort of an inside peek. And then we met Steph at his sports business summit. And then Steph's been on my podcast. And he has changed his approach almost entirely through reps, through maturity. Because what you get at the pro level is, if you're good enough, a 14 to 20-year career, and you grow up. And so Steph has become so comfortable on camera. He's an activist. He interviews Barack Obama. He does spots with CarMax and Under Armour, and he's got his own shoe. And the version of Steph that we see and we love now is not how Steph was on camera. So there's an element of patience and finding a team who can guide you to your authentic voice.
Yeah, and that confidence of winning can give you confidence off the field or off the court.
No question. I think that's a hindrance for a lot of athletes, and especially today's day and age, is the fear of losing. Because when you lose, you get flogged. I got smoked when I played like shit in the championship series, or not the championship series that we know it now, but the one at the bubble in Utah.
Yeah.
You know, I shot 1 for 19, so I deserved to get smoked. And I got smoked because I put myself out there. And I'll always be proud of that when I played, is I verbalized that I wanted to be the best. And when I won an MVP of a championship, I said I was the best. That pissed a lot of people off. That's what Muhammad Ali's done. It's what Michael Jordan's done. It's what LeBron James and Steph Curry have done. And the other side of it is the risk is when ultimately, as we all are, not the best, and we get beaten by our opponents and we get held to no goals and no assists, that people are going to get after you. So you can't be afraid of it. You got to know that this too shall pass.
And you're in the arena, right? That's part of, unfortunately, being in the arena.
Yeah.
Whether it's on the field or in the front office, people are just going to come after you. And we talked about it last week. It's like, unfortunately, it's part of social. But like, if you're in the arena knowing that that's going to happen because you're putting yourself out there, I don't know. I just always go back to, we only have one shot at this, one shot at our life, and might as well get in the arena.
Totally. And if you believe in manifestation or achieving the biggest of dreams, you've got to think it, you've got to say it before you go do it. And so if you're skipping step 2, you ain't going to go do it.
Yeah.
And that's just the hard part. But that's what man in the arena is about. It's right up there.
Right up there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I finally took
Teddy
the plastic off.
Yeah,
for you.
yeah. All right. Should we get into questions?
Yes.
From the
Yeah.
audience?
Let's do questions.
Yeah.
First one, Brett.
Hey, Mike and Paul. This is Paul Blackburn here in Louisville, Kentucky. My question is around the draft, with it coming up here in the next couple weeks. So what I wondered is, what does the process look like for a college player that would like to play professional lacrosse in the PLL? Do they have to submit their name into you guys to be entered into the draft, or do you go through and select the players along with the coaches and GMs from the programs? Thanks for this opportunity to ask this question. Hope you guys have a great day and can't wait till the season starts. Thanks.
Paul, great question. Shout out to Louisville. We'll see you at the All-Star game. We should figure out a way that he sent that question on how to get him tickets to the All-Star game.
Yeah. July 13th.
Yeah,
get
Paul Blackburn.
Some tickets.
Yeah, we're going to get him some tickets to the All-Star game. So I appreciate the question. I'll take first shot at it. So there was a process when I was in MLL that was a bit strange. It was covert. And I remember almost not being eligible to be drafted because at the time we were the number 4 seed playing in the playoffs, trying to get to championship weekend and win a title. And I was a senior. And the last thing Petro and Bobby Benson were looking to do was complete paperwork that was emailed to them and potentially fell in their junk inbox that myself, Steven Pizer, Kevin Huntley were eligible. So part of building the PLL is we recognize sort of the history of pro lacrosse and areas we can fix. We have a lax product team that's led by Rachel DeCecco, Andrew Manning, Andrew Sinnenberg, Seth Tierney, Joel White. They're all in the trenches communicating with coaches at the collegiate level and adhering to NCAA compliance. We work with our GC Jess Evans, blah, blah, blah. So there's the legal component. But I appreciate this question because as the PLL gets further and further out there to new fans, I get asked a lot, like, how does a kid get in your league? And my first answer is, we have a draft. And they go, well, tell me about college lacrosse. And I think it's important to get really into the weeds around how you make it to the pros. And then once you're in, or if you're not selected, because we only have 4 rounds, how you're eligible to be picked up, which Ricky Miezon, as an example, got picked up by the California Redwoods for the Champ Series and is eligible and hoping to play this season, depending on how training camp and everything unfolds.
Totally. I mean, for me, you laid the process out well. For me, I think about there's only 32 guys that are going to be selected, right, in these 4 rounds. And so, that's not a lot of players, but it's also pro lacrosse.
Yeah.
And it's professional sports. And so, how does the next crop, or the guys that want to break their way, the undrafted guys like a Ryder Garnsey who was undrafted, make their way in front of these coaches and GMs? And then the championship series, like we talked about last week, which again is the top 4 teams to regular season play in sixes format, which is Olympic format, in our off-season tournament. Those guys then have greater opportunities as well to jump into those rosters because they may be a better fit for sixes. So for me, it's always exciting to see if there's some undrafted guys. I mean, Ryder Garnsey is one of the biggest stars in the PLL when undrafted. So it's not to say that, hey, the draft picks are always they're all going to be great and hopefully future stars, but there's a chance for guys to go undrafted. Working with the, get their film can come through anywhere. Like I've gotten film introductions from college coaches where they're like, hey, you guys didn't take a look at this guy, you didn't draft him.
Yep.
I'll send it to Rachel. She sends it to all the coaches, or Seth Tierney. They evaluate it, right? Like we're always putting more film out because we just know there's great players out there, and you never know when your shot's going to be called. Season's long. It's physical. Injuries happen. Stay ready.
Yeah. Yeah. And the last thing is the tie to the NBA we were talking about earlier and building stars. I mean, the new crop of stars, talk about Luka Doncic, Jokic, Giannis. I mean, you have Ant-Man, Anthony Edwards, but 3 of those 4 are international players. So how do we continue to keep an open line of communication in scouting the Japanese national team? Canadian-born summer box players that didn't play university ball. How are we thinking about talent that lives outside of the U.S. collegiate system?
Hi, guys. This is Zach from Houston, Texas. Go Chaos. My question is, when will PLL have that video game? I think it would be so cool to have a field play PL lacrosse video game, maybe like a FIFA style, where you have game modes like street lacrosse or the women's game. Thank you for all you do for lacrosse.
Awesome. Zach from Houston, Texas. Appreciate you, brother. Great question. We actually get this asked a fair amount.
Yeah.
A couple things at play, right? I think what you're asking around is a console video game. We've done a digital video game, and Top Shelf, it's still available. People are still actively playing. I think we have something like...
We had 100,000 people plus playing that game.
I think there's like 15,000 people that are still actively playing right now.
And we haven't updated in 2 years.
We haven't updated or promoted in 2 years, which shows that there's a stickiness and a demand for this type of stuff. Console games are a little bit different because of it's not as, it's a lot more intricate, a lot more development hours, a lot more art needs to go into it. Now, you had some good ideas like street lacrosse style, something we were thinking about. NBA Jam is a huge NFL Blitz. Those were games we played all the time.
Yeah.
We were young, so there's some nostalgia around that. But I also think those aren't going to be as intricate to build and could be something that a console partner wants to do with us. I think one of the issues that you have with these is just sort of like opening up the hood a bit, and this is why we created this show, is that you talk to one of these console game companies, and they'll do a TAM analysis. What's total addressable market? How many people are playing? How many people will buy? Because when they make a commitment to invest in a console game, they're investing millions and millions of dollars from their developers, from their artists to build that. And it's kind of like a book, which you know a lot about with your book. And they got to make a bet there's going to be enough people buying those things. And so we're always like debating them on that. I think for us, what we're starting to get to the place of is there's enough demand from people like Zach where we're like, or Beck, where we're like, hey, we are trying to do this. We know there's enough demand from audience. Why don't you just go to a gaming studio and say, hey, let's just do this together. Yeah. And, maybe we're a little more nimble, a little more agile. Maybe it's something that's a digital game. Maybe it's a console, but not wait for a big gaming developer to pay us a fee up front, and let's just go do it together in a more nimble, fast way. So we're having those conversations. I don't know, maybe we do a crowdfunding where, we get a certain number of votes that come in and say, let's go do this.
Yeah.
What do you think?
No, it's a great note, and it's definitely the direction that we've been contemplating since starting the PLL. And I like Top Shelf. I think the video game business is a bit like the movie business in that it has gotten more strategic and has scaled back the number of titles that they put out versus 20 years ago. knowing Tony Hawk and the relationship that he built with Activision, which was, by the way, like walking down the street, knocking on doors and trying to sell through skate in America, which at the time reminds me of lacrosse in America from a TAM perspective. He was able to push that through because video game titles were getting made like movie titles at the time. 24 studio, and there were a dozen studios. So the good news is with new technology and new hardware, the costs have gone down. But to create a proper FIFA style game, which by the way I want to do, is going to require a co-investment from a major studio. I mean, look, I think about this through the lens of storytelling. Film, television, documentaries, books, podcasts, owned and operated content, what we do across social media, your network partners for the live games, and video games are all dimensions where you can raise the profile. FIFA did it for soccer in America. Really, global football is complex.
Is that what got you into Premier League, playing FIFA? I feel
100%.
Like you were got into Premier League because you were playing FIFA in college.
100%.
Yeah.
That's why I got into it. I understood what the fucking ollie was because I was playing Tony Hawk Pro Skater.
Yeah.
Right. And I watched the NHL because I loved Mighty Ducks.
Right.
If there was, if there was bobsledding pro league during Cool Runnings, I would have probably watched that. Dipping now into film, you have Rudy, Field of Dreams, Remember the Titans, a history of film that helped elevate sport. Tiger Woods to golf in the EA Sports title. So these are areas that our strategy team is working on, our finance team is looking at. We wish it was as easy as just turning on the light switch in the room and benefiting from it. It's not, because it has to be fruitful to your partner in the process. But we've done crazier things. We convinced NBC and then ESPN to cover lacrosse, and it's worked out.
Yep.
So we're hell-bent on doing that for video games.
My calendar's buzzing at me. Last question.
Cool.
What's up, Paul and Mike? This is Samir. I am calling with a question that I have, but I assume other lacrosse fans have as well. What's going on with Lyle Thompson? Can we expect to see him back in the PLL? All right. Thanks, guys.
Well, shout out Samir. Well, TLN was constructed by Samir Chaudhry. And he was one of the first calls when episode 1 dropped of one-on-ones. And he didn't actually see any promo for it. The algo served it to him on iTunes or Spotify, and immediately gave us feedback, but said, "Hey, I want to call and leave a question." I said, "Go for it. Ask us your hardest question." And this might be this might be one of them. So first of all, I'll say that Lyle's a close friend of mine. I played my last season with him. I adore him. We've been to Onondaga Nation to shoot the story of Lyle, Brett and I, and I stay in touch with him. I hope that Lyle comes back and plays in the PLL. The decision that he made last summer was a personal one, and he went on his Instagram and talked about it in a selfie video format. He reached a place where he was feeling burnt out of travel, and he's got 5 beautiful kids that are now at an age where they're playing summer sports. And he decided to take a personal decision, given that he plays both NLL and PLL, essentially traveling 8 months of the year, which I know about when I was doing both, to get the summer back and help start his family or raise his family. So that was a personal decision, and that's happened in other pro sports leagues. Michael Jordan retired in the middle of his double three-peat. And he took it for personal reasons. His father had passed away, and he also said that he was feeling burnt out from all of the work. Barry Sanders notoriously and famously retired when he was 30 and was having the best career of any running back in football history. We're seeing it more in the NFL than ever because of safety concerns. But this is a good question because it brings a larger point to life, which is, to play pro sports, it requires a level of commitment, being in the arena, and the resilience to understand that you're probably going to lose more than you win. LeBron James has had statistically the greatest NBA career ever. And he doesn't win the championship every season. In fact, he by majority, loses the championship. And so of our 8 teams, 7 teams every season go home and lose. That's fucking taxing. Yeah. And so I totally empathize with players that are on the road. I mean, you and I talked about this. WWE's on the road 52 weeks a year. Those athletes love it. They're competitive, but they are fatigued because they live out of hotels. It is not for the faint of heart playing pro sports. So that's number one. And then number 2 is part of what we're reconciling at the PLL behind the scenes is that we adopted players like me from MLL that actually had full-time jobs. You know, mine happened to be building the PLL with Mike, but Michael Earhart, who just retired this year, is a really successful commercial real estate agent in New York City. There are a lot of guys that because they were getting paid like I was, $14,000 to play in MLL, they had full-time gigs and they were doing both. So what we've never discussed, but we talk about it internally, is how do we manage the transition from being a part-time or part-time full-time in another gig in lacrosse, and frankly, doing a fucking great job at it, a lot of these guys, to just being full-time. We're transitioning now, but it's really difficult to ask someone who has a successful off-the-field career to, oh, by the way, we've quadrupled your wage in PLL. We want you to be full-time with us. That means leave your other job that might be paying you $100,000 or more a year. That's unreasonable for you and I to ask. So we work closely with our players to especially cater to the rookies that are coming in and say, hey, maybe we hold off on a finance job. Here's what the future looks like over the next 3 years. Here's how we can get you sponsorship revenue. Here's how we can build your media profile, camps and clinics.
Here's our marketing addendum.
Yeah. We're paying you more. I view the future of PLL when it is every athlete full-time living in market is going to be a 2 to 4 year transition where the rookies hold on, first, second, third, fourth class, and then the guys who are doing both phase out naturally through retirement and so on. So there's this psycho component that we often discuss, and we want to land that plane as we take the PLL to the moon. And that is taking sports in America from the Big 5 to the Big 6.
Yeah. I mean, look, all that resonates for me, and what Lyle's journey is resonates for me. I think that we're really grateful for his time in the PLL, and if he decides to come back, I'm sure there'll be a slot for him if a GM decides there is. I mean, I think there's 2 things that come to mind for me, aside from all the things you talked about. First is like there'll be people on social like, well, he chose NLL over PLL, and I mean, for me, it's like great. He's still in the lacrosse ecosystem. I would say it's like similar to like, Lewis Hamilton if he was driving in F1 and NASCAR. He can't do both. He's got to pick one, but it's still good for motorsports. So for me, him continuing to play in the NLL is fantastic. One of the things we didn't hit on is that like traveling with us is every weekend. We're in the NLL, you have a consistency. Maybe you live in that market. It's a home and away model. You travel with us every weekend. It's more akin to WWE or in F1.
Yeah.
It's also in the summer, which is the hardest months, right? Like we hear it from our staff. They're like, I'm missing a wedding. And you're like, well, work or what? And I miss weddings, and it's hard. And also like you have summer vacation, and when you have 5 kids, I feel like I have a lot more empathy for the position that Lyle's in also with all the work he's done to build a credible career. And, when you have kids, man, like the worst, it's like, you sent me a quote this weekend. You're like, someone said it was either Steve Jobs, someone else. It's like having a kid is like looking at your heart outside of your body every day.
Yeah.
And if you have 5 of those hearts outside your body and you're leaving for 8 months out of the year and traveling, especially in the summer months, I imagine that's taking a toll on me when I have to leave the house or travel for weekends just with one son. And you hear daddy, and it's just like it knifes you a bit. So I try to be logical about it and be like, well, this is how we put food on the table. But I think there's a lot of people out there who deal with this, and to the extent that he has the ability to focus more on his family and then still be in the lacrosse arena, I applaud him for that.
Yeah. And you brought up a good point around travel and him playing NLL and then him also now playing in MSL. So summer box lacrosse, for those that aren't aware of it, it's essentially senior A Canadian lacrosse. They've competed for a Man Cup for a long time. It is not dissimilar from the Allen Cup for those who pay attention to senior A Canadian hockey. And both senior A on the hockey and lacrosse side feed into the NHL, the NLL, the PLL. There was a new structure set forth when we launched the PLL that made its way onto social, where players in the PLL could not also play in MSL. And I'll tell you for two reasons: legal and insurance. Running the NFL, running the PLL, running the NBA, running the NHL is really expensive. And the largest cost is often insurance. I mean, think about it. We take insurance out on our homes, on our personal lives, on, personal items. And the likelihood of insurance needed to be called is really low. When you're asking for insurance to be taken out in a contact sport where there is at least one injury every game, the cost is really high. So I mentioned the Allen Cup in hockey because Gary Bettman and the NHL do not allow their players to play in senior A hockey. The owners don't allow it either. There's risk of injury. And you know what? We've leveled up professional lacrosse, and our coaches and GMs don't want their guys doing anything but training with Stedman and Howard Head during the weeks in between, being at practice, showing up healthy without sore muscles so that they can win their first or second PLL championship. So I just wanted to address that head on too. And Lyle will say this in his video, if you look at it, and his press release, his intention wasn't to choose one or the other, but he plays for the Six Nations Chiefs, which if you haven't seen a game, it's an amazing experience because it's at the epicenter of the Creator's game, and it's right down the street from him, and he plays home games. So anyway, I think about Lyle a lot. I love him dearly. Great question, Samir. And that wraps up.
That wraps it up.
Episode
3.
Episode 3.
My calendar is buzzing at me right now.
Yeah, fine.
We got to get done.
Yeah, you got to put do not disturb next week.
Yeah. We got to go.
But next week is going to be packed. So it's unlikely, I'd say, that this episode is going to come out next Wednesday. We're going to try to sort it out.
We'll sort it.
Because we have our draft on Tuesday. I'm going to be in Bristol.
You're going to be in Bristol.
You're speaking at a Sportico conference here in LA.
Yeah.
You're hosting a bunch of people on a panel. That's Wednesday. So we'll sort it out, Brett. We'll sort it out. Okay, everyone.
May 7th, the draft, 7 p.m., ESPNU and ESPN Plus. Tune in to the greatest draft ever.
Yeah. Cheap plug. My book's coming out on the 7th, too.
Plug it real quick. Not cheap.
The Way of the Champion. You can get it anywhere. Amazon. You can go to my website, thewayofthechampion.com. Barnes & Noble, you name it. Lessons from our experiences and the greatest athletes of all time.
Hell yeah. Let's get it, everyone.